too, and then they reel off a story about checking and rechecking that the iron is turned off. Lily Bailey just smiles politely at that because in her case, OCD was a devastating mental illness. In her new book, she recounts a childhood and adolescence possessed by obsessions, a voice in her head warning she could kill with a look, spread fatal disease with just one touch. We spoke earlier today.
So when I was younger, everything I thought was always, we should do this or we should do that. And I didn't know it was OCD, but I heard my OCD as a kind of another voice within me. I wasn't aware that that was weird until other kids at school started having imaginary friends who they would kind of, turn on and off. Like, they'd bring them into school and be like, oh, Sandra's sitting here, kind of thing. And I was like, what, you don't have one all the time? And also, like, their imaginary friends were kind of for show, like they were paraded around. And I think, it slightly dawned on me at that point that I must be quite different. But it would be a long time before I would actually realise just how different I actually was.
So, do you ever remember thinking about I?
No, not really. Although, when I got a little bit older, I started having intrusive thoughts. And intrusive thoughts are quite common. Like, everyone in the population has them. It's, if you've ever stood on a train platform and thought, what if I push someone? But most people have that thought and they kind of dismiss it. They're like, oh, that's a bit weird, that's not me. And they move on with their lives and they don't get completely stuck on that thought. I would have thoughts like maybe I can kill someone with a thought and get really stuck on it. And when I had those intrusive thoughts, that would be the one time that I would go, I, and my friend would be sitting there in my head going, that's a terrible, terrible thought. And I'd be like, how did you get off so easily? Why does it have to be me who has this thought by myself? And that was quite a stressful and lonely experience.
What happens next with the compulsion is where I got the really strong sense of a profound illness. So what did you do to compensate for this badness?
So I would make lists of all the things I had done that might be bad. The obsession would come in, I've done this thing and it's bad. And I would then have to write it on a list. And so just to give you an idea of how that might work, I might be, with a friend and she might come kind of like what I felt was in my personal space. And I'd be like, oh my God, I wonder if I smell, and she's smelt me because she's come really close to me. So I'd take the letter S for space and put it on a list. And then she's so close to me that I'm kind of leaning away and maybe my arm brushes a passerby in the street and I'm like, oh my God, have I injured them? Are they going to bleed out? Then a child walks past and I'm like, do not look at that child's bum, because if you look at that child's bum, it might get caught on camera. And, you might be in real trouble with the police, you might go to prison. So I take the letter B for bum. So then I'd be going S for space, A for arm, B for bum. And I'd be going SAB, SAB, SAB. And, that could have happened in like 20, 30 seconds. So then if you imagine how many you would have in a day, like my list would just really, really pile up. I could have hundreds of letters a day on these lists.
And were you expecting yourself to remember the order of the letters, to sort of chant them?
Yeah, very much so.
And you described that somehow you felt that if you could do this enough, you would get back to blank state. What's blank state?
So blank slate would be where I felt like I had kind of absolved myself, when I'd been able to go through all the letters on my list and work out whether things really were bad, and I'd come to some sort of sense of resolution. I would have what I would call blank slate, and it was kind of a moment of euphoria where I'd just be like, oh, it's done. And this is like common in people with OCD, they'll do their compulsions, and after the compulsion there'll be a real profound sense of relief, and that might last for like a few minutes, or it might last for a few seconds before the next obsession comes in and it's like, bam, start all over again. And in this way, I think OCD is quite similar to an addiction. Like, you do the compulsion, you get the hit, but then it's like, but how long will that sustain you for?
Later, a wonderful psychiatrist that you saw who was very helpful for you, talked to you about the idea of resistance, that you had to be like a guerrilla fighter really in your own head, and the idea that you would resist this other presence in your head. You say it hit you like a bullet from behind. Why?
Because I think, when people do compulsions, they you know, they do it because it feels like the solution to the problem. So I would be, you know, compulsively making lists, and I felt like if I did that enough, then one day I'd be a good person. And I really hadn't realized that actually it was the doing the compulsions that was just perpetuating the whole problem. So then the idea of not doing them, and that it might be that simple, although obviously it's really not that simple in practice, but the premise, don't do it, don't go with it, is so simple. I couldn't believe that that might actually be the answer.
In a way, it seems like the obsessions that you had, am I hurting somebody else and what do they think of me, are so characteristic of a teenage girl, aren't they? I mean, taken to a degree of a serious mental illness, but nevertheless they have their genesis in a teenage girl's concerns. Who are you now?
I don't know. I still wonder who I am. And it's funny, like, I do interviews in relation to the book, and, you know, sometimes I'll, like, listen to them back, and in one I might sound quite mellow and quite calm, and then in another one I might sound totally like, and then this happened, and then this happened, and I'm like, I'm wildly inconsistent. I wake up in the morning and I don't really know who I am or what I will become. But what I've had to do is to just, like, my response to that now is different, because before I'd be like, who the hell am I? And now I'm more like, I don't know who I am yet, you know?
I shook your hand before and I was conscious that you'd been plagued by all these ideas about disease and whether or not you'd get AIDS and E. coli and all the rest of it. And when I shook your hand, your beautiful English hand, it was slightly rougher than I expected. I imagine in part because there was a time when you were washing your hands so much. Either that or you're a gardener. You're not, I imagine.
No, I'm not.
Was that okay for you when we shook hands, or did you have to say to yourself, she's washed her hands after the toilet, it's okay, or was that something you have to cope with?
It's really funny because you're the first person on this tour who said that to me, and I get very stressed out about shaking people's hands.
I thought about not, and I'm sorry, I should have put my hands in
No,
my
because
pockets.
everyone else has shaken my hand, and actually it's, you know, I wouldn't want people to not, because part of me getting better involves me taking the things that cause me so much distress and just going, I'm going to roll with it. So yes, my hands are rougher than the average person's hand because I have spent years washing them, and I'm like, someone's going to shake my hand and they're going to think that's really, really horrible, that I'm like a bloke or something. Not that there's anything wrong with blokes, but you know, that kind of, yeah, like that kind of rough gardener, outdoorsy type thing. I'm really embarrassed about it.
Are you? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I mentioned it. No, but...
No, I want to talk about it. I'm glad you've asked. And also...
So there's the worry of that. Was there a concern about what's on my hands?
Yeah, not so much what's on your hand, but that I might have an infectious disease on my hand that I might give you. And also, I'm quite nervous at the moment because I'm doing interviews, and so my hands get a bit clammy. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to shake that person's hand, my hand's going to be clammy, they're going to think that's so disgusting. Mm-hmm. And in that moment, you know, sometimes all I've wanted to do this week is go, I'm not going to shake your hand. But how would that improve me in any way? It wouldn't.
When I shook your hand, I thought, oh my goodness, look at her English face, and she's so young and she's so brave, and your hand said to me, spoke to me about what you've been through, spoke to me about your intelligence and your wisdom and your bravery at putting all this down in a book in a way that is, well, if you're a people pleaser, you've done it with the book, but in a way that is so true and so honest and so real. And that's what your handshake said to me, and I thought it was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. That really means a lot.
Great to talk to you.
You too.
And that's all we have time for this week. Next week,